it was also kind of fun for me to kind of, every time that I'm asked to do this, and I bring out the old, presentation and have to look at it, it's kind of like, for me, revisiting old friends, old memories. So that's always good. And I hadn't done this for a while, so I had to update it. But anyways, looking at my work myself, it's like looking at old friends. So I'm glad you're here, and we'll all look at that together. So you can go ahead and start, Seth.
Okay.
All right. So this is me. Whoop. Yep, that's me. All right, you can go to the second one. All right. So what Seth told you is I went to the University of Michigan for my undergraduate degree. And maybe some of you local people, what you don't know is that I was born in California, but I was raised in Michigan my whole life. I went to U of M. And I came out to California in 1986 to go to graduate school. So, but before I was in graduate school, I was busy working at a community college in Michigan, and I was trying to put a new body of work together because I had applied to graduate school at CGU and I didn't get in. So I was hurrying up and, doing a new body of work. And so while I was there, I was teaching myself how to throw on the wheel because I never really learned the first time around. So I thought, oh, I'll spend a whole year throwing, and I quickly got bored, but I liked making lidded pots. And so this is cone 10 all the way from 1985. So anyways, that's next. All right, this, like I said, I told myself I'd throw pots all year. I didn't. I don't know how long I lasted, but I got bored, so I just started throwing forms and then altering them. And I made a whole bunch of what I called monsters, all with just altered forms. And this is all cone 10. I did a lot of these. And this work, surprisingly enough, got me to California. So. All right. All right, I'm in California. This was part of my MFA show. The funny thing about, coming to California, and I mean, what a shock. I was maybe 24 years old. I thought I knew everything. I didn't know anything. And I got to Southern California and I started studying with Paul Soldner, and that was very different than what I was used to, but it was wonderful. This image that you're looking at now is Untitled. Back then, I was always afraid to put a title on anything because I don't know, I was pretty much afraid of a lot of things way back then. But I had done a lot of what I'd called monsters. And I was like, I'm never doing another animal again. No more monsters, nothing representational. But after 2 years of working, in this slide especially, you can tell that the animals were kind of creeping back in. So anyways, you can go to the next one, Seth. This is a drawing that I did. This was part of my MFA show. When I was in undergraduate school, I always did I was actually a printmaking ceramics major. I love to draw. And so I've always kind of done both. And so way back then, this was, I think it was ceramic materials on paper. So I just took iron oxide, rutile, anything that I could find in the ceramic studio, and added water and glue to it, and I drew on paper. Because that was the only way at that time I felt like I could translate. So these were large. Next. This is another piece from my MFA show. And what I always put this in my presentation because I love it, because it's like a thread to what I'm still doing. This was the first piece where I made like two pieces that were having a relationship, kind of, you know, like that piece is kind of hugging the other piece. Everything about what this did, I was like, oh, I like that. And it's interesting for me is because I'm still doing the same thing. It's like maybe not exactly, but I like looking at the threads of, you know, what was then and what is now, and they're the same. Next. All right, done with graduate school. I got a job working for Dennis O'Connor. I was doing mosaics, and just everything. I got everything was different, and I'd always wanted to work in mixed media. So this was a piece that I made. I started going to junkyards in California. Those were great, and I would just collect things and get inspired. So this was called the Traffic Jam. And when I first moved to California, I couldn't believe like all the old cars, they didn't have any rust on them, and it was just really cool. So this was like a little kinetic piece that lit up and it spins around in a circle. And again, it was just kind of inspired by California and maybe junkyards. Next. This is another from that same series. You can see the bottom is got mosaic on it. Again, I was still working for Dennis, and he was wonderful. Anything that I wanted to do with any kind of tile, he was like, sure, Gina, you know what I mean? So I took that to the studio and I tiled that on place. This is called the weather vane, and this spins in a circle. Next. Another series. This is called Lucy. I used to have a dog named Lucy, and she was a handful, but this is just a little kind of like a pull toy based on her. Next. This is another drawing at the time. Again, I'd moved to, I think that's probably oil pastel and charcoal, and again, the kind of kinetic kind of spinning ideas there. Everything about that series was based on toys. I like toys, and I like the idea of making things that moved. Next. Sidetrack. Like I said, I worked for my good friend Dennis, and I learned how to mosaic. So at that time, I just was like, well, I'm going to mosaic my bathroom. And I taught my mom how to do it. She would come out and visit me every year. And I'm like, Mom, we're going to mosaic my bathroom, all 4 walls from top to bottom. So I taught her how to do it. And we took about a month to do this. And I didn't plan anything out. I just kind of draw a line and go, oh, put this here. And so my mom and I did this together. Next. This is another in the bathroom, over the sink. So I got my mom hooked the next year. She was like, well, what are we going to do this year? So I'm like, okay, Mom, this year we're going to do my back retaining wall. And I knew that I wanted it to be a lot looser. So I took her to Watts Towers and I said, Mom, I like this. Let's do this next. So we got, and this was all donated. I dumpster dived for all this tile. We did this the next year. So go ahead, Seth. This is a nice detail. What I used to do is then I would set up all the cement work the day before and share. Like I would set up the cement, have it all wet, and then I invited people to come in and do the drawings or press things into it. And it was really fun because it was a way for me to let go of the preciousness of the outcome. It's like, instead of controlling it, it's like you're giving up control by giving people sections to kind of work on. And this was my lovely stepdaughter, Allison, who is an adult now, and she lives up in Santa Barbara. That was her drawing. Next. This is just a detail. You can see like little pinch pots there and shells, and then you can see a little bit of the arch there that's in the bottom right. Again, those were just friends who came and pushed stuff into the cement. And next. I was still doing other things besides ceramics. This is, again, this was a dumpster dive. I used to work at First Street Gallery and Art Center. Seth knows all about that place. And I found this kind of partially made, I saw a bench in it, and I got it out of the trash, and I put legs on it, and I covered the whole thing in license plates. And anyways, I made that whole thing. And the idea was that it was going to be a dog bench. It was going to be for my dogs to sit on, because I thought that they should have furniture. This was before I had my own kids. So, but what happened was funny, is it was so nice that I decided that they couldn't have it. So we still have it now. So this was just a bench that I made. All right, back to clay. After I worked for Dennis, my next job was for Street Gallery and Art Center. I worked there for a long time, and I loved it there. That was a great place to work right out of graduate school, because what happened was every day I would go to work, and my students there were doing anything they wanted every single day. What do you want to do? And then they would just start making it. They never worried about it. They never cared. It was just like kind of automatic. And so I started adopting that idea, like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to make this. You know what I mean? I'd never made figures before. I'd never done people. I was always, all my stuff was always untitled. And after working there, I just kind of, all my own fun work became all the work. And I still try to have that as my rule. Like, I don't want to do it if I'm not having fun. So this wasn't the first piece in that series, but this was those years where I started making work and not caring what anybody thought. So, all right. And this is called Bird in Hand. So this is salt fired. This was Solana after, I didn't have a title on this. I can't remember what I called it, but the title was from a good friend of mine who bought this piece, and she named it Solana. But it was kind of the first of more architectural kind of figures that I started making. And I made this at the school that I worked at that year. Next. Small pieces. This is slip cast. I have a tendency to go back and forth between big and small. All the big pieces take time. And sometimes you just want that instant, kind of more instant gratification. So I often will work small and big. And this is like a real small little piece. And probably, this wasn't the first piece I did, but I've done a lot of these kind of pieces where I've got little figures riding on animals, and I like doing that. It's fun for me. Next. So I stopped drawing on paper. My studio is not big enough to handle paper, so I just started drawing on clay. This is just a large platter that I made, and I drew with slips and stains, and I don't usually, I don't remember, I mean, this is back in 2002, but a lot of times I don't pre-draw these. I just kind of start sketching, and they just kind of are created like on site. Next. This was when I first started making, all my figures were always heads. And then eventually I started making heads and shoulders. And this was probably maybe the first year that I started making whole bodies. You know, like, so this is a figure that I made, but it's lying down, so it's much easier. But I'd always wanted to do a duck, a mallard duck, because when I was a kid, I used to feed those kinds of ducks when I lived in Michigan. So it was just a fun piece. And my youngest daughter, Daisy, she was probably about maybe 3, and she posed for me with this piece. That was fun. I drew a piece of chalk around her body so that I would know how to start, and when she was in that position, and then afterwards I made that, and she would say, you know, Mommy, is that me? So it's fun. I still have the photographs of her in this pose. So next. This is my first piece where I was standing up. I felt like I was kind of growing up, right? First heads and then shoulders and then seated. And then this is the first piece that I made where I did like a full figure standing up. So that was kind of a, you know, a milestone for me. And this piece is actually out at the Maloof house in one of their backyards. It's made in 2 pieces. Right below the dress, it's in a second part. So next. Another piece from that same kind of period. And again, just kind of experimenting with what else can I put on top besides a bird, right? So I did this grasshopper. The only thing that's a bummer about the grasshopper is I'm always having to go out. This is also out at the Maloof house, and I've repaired it like 3 times. So the little antlers on top are always coming off. All right, next. This was going back to just doing a straightforward head. When I teach, a lot of times I have the students do heads. And so this was a demo. I think I was working at Whittier College. And again, I'm like, what else can I put with a head? And my daughter, Daisy at the time, really likes snakes. So I'm like, okay, let's make a snake. So again, I like kind of exploring animals and people together. Next. So this is again, I needed to go small. I started making these, this says 2005. I think this was maybe the beginning of these, but I call them my memory masks. And so they're made with all kinds of different shards and objects. And I push the clay into, you know, like the crack in the sidewalk or just anything. They're all like parts and pieces from my background, my surrounding, my history. And so they all end up having some kind of meaning for me. And that's why I call them memory masks. Next. So this is I should have showed this one first. So this is called Luke's mask because I had made him his own little cup with that. Luke is my son, and I'd made him a little cup with his name on it, and I accidentally broke it. And I was kind of mortified because I felt really bad. He was little. So I took all the shards and I made this for him. I don't even know where this is. I hope I still have it. But it was my way of being able to kind of keep those pieces and for him. So next. Just another platter. Again, I kind of move back and forth between 2D and 3D. And this, again, these, I don't have that much to say about these. I like drawing. I like exploring images that tell a story. Next. Gosh, I don't remember. I don't have a story on this one other than I made it and I was finished with it. And it was the first piece that I made that didn't have an animal with it. I was like, I went to put something on it and I realized that it didn't need anything. She was really beautiful. And the only thing I wish is I don't have a picture, but on the back of her, she's got like a long braid going down her back. She looks so nice. And so this is, she's all alone. So yeah, that's it. Next, Seth. Just more platters. I work with water a lot. I like using water, drawing water. It's kind of a metaphor. Next. So this I made in 2006. I had another new job, and a lot of times my work is not, I never think of it as autobiographical, but it's like after I make it, I realize it is. And so I titled this Balancing Act because it was a new job, a new teaching job, and I was balancing a lot. I was driving a long distance and my kids were still little, and it was just like, that's me, you know, trying to kind of do it all. And then the coffee, of course, was because I was drinking so much coffee all the time. So next. Eve. This was after a large commission piece that I had. I did Adam and Eve. And at this point, I only had done Eve. I did Eve, a really big, like 5 foot tall Eve. And to make a long story short, I finished the whole thing. It was in leather hard stage in my studio. And I'm always really confident about everything that I do. And I'm always thinking that nothing is ever going to go wrong. And I made Eve. She was beautiful. The buyer came out to my house. They loved it. And then I had to do a little bit more work on it. I won't go into detail, but anyways, so the next morning, my husband, John, had come into the house. He's like, Gina, something bad happened. And so anyways, the entire piece, the 5-foot tall Eve, had fallen into like a million pieces. So I had to call the buyer and say, hey, you know, we have a problem. He's like, did my check bounce? And I'm like, no, the whole thing was on the floor. So I had to go, he's like, and I'm like, do you mind if I don't make it right away? So anyway, so this was like a small Eve. You can see she's like, what, 37 inches, like 3 feet high, which at that point I felt like was nothing. So I kind of made her first show that, called Queen for a Day down in Pomona. And it was just me kind of licking my wounds in my big fat ego and going, I'll just go smaller. And so that's the story on this. Next. Yellow Goddess. This again, just exploring form and color. Next. This was more of a bowl shape. This was a nice piece. Again, just having fun with images and color. I love this color blue on here. Next. Feather Tree. This was after, again, this is just exploring heads again and what can I make on top of it. The feathers have a long story. I don't want to go into that, but they look a lot like leaves and I put feathers instead. So feathers have to do with something that I do with memories, but that's another story. So anyways, you can go next, Seth. Another girl with songbirds. I don't know why. I always come back to doing the female figure. I like doing it. They're beautiful, I think. And I like, I never get tired of doing these, so I just keep doing them. Next. A platter. Again, there's that water. I am an island. Next. Horse and rider. This was started as a commission, and then it was too big, so I ended up kind of adding the girl to it and the bird and whatever. I got to have this out at the LA County Fair one year, and that was pretty awesome. So no story behind this other than, again, just exploring shapes with animals and people. Next. This is a little piece. I was thinking about this the other day when I was looking at this slideshow, and I'm like thinking, that was me on top of there. I'm like, that's how I want to feel all the time. Next. This piece is out at the Maloof house too. They have this piece. The only thing that I can say about this is, again, my work is kind of evolved. It keeps evolving. And this was probably the beginning of, well, towards the beginning of me making, like I would make the figure, but then somehow the hair started getting more and more important and the hair started turning into things. So rather than having something just on top of a figure, the elements that I would add to it started becoming the figure. And that was even more fun for me. Next. This was, I always have a hard time talking about this piece. My friend Dennis O'Connor had died and I had to go back to work and make art like a week later. Super hard. And this is the piece that I made for that. Next. Easy Rider. I started, this kind of goes back to throwing on the wheel, altering shapes and making them into, making them into stuff. These are just joy. I probably did this as a demo for a class. And again, this is like me getting to kind of play in the studio with shapes and clay. Next. This is another demo piece. And again, just the hair started getting more and more important. This is really crazy. Again, there's the water, the hair is kind of water, and there's a lot going on there. But the hair and what was going on just started to take over the whole piece. As it went along, I felt like the face was almost secondary. Next. This was one of those pivotal pieces. It's crazy heavy. I hardly ever show it because I never want to drag it around. I did get to have it at the Ontario airport for almost 2 years. This is called Swept Away. And like I said, that hair started taking over and becoming kind of more important than the face. And this is one of those. I love this piece. These are all like, they're basically like naked ladies. And my kids were still small at that point, and they're like, Mom, why do all the girls have to be naked? I'd be like, because it's beautiful. They're beautiful. They're like, ah. So next. This is a little tiny piece. I loved this piece. Again, I make things, and this is like one of those, it took me, I don't know, I did this within an hour or something like that, maybe 2 hours, just like a quick little study, right? And I loved it so much. And I called it Donald's favorite because that was a good friend of mine. And we were in a show together, and that was his favorite piece. So of course I accidentally broke it one day. I think I bumped it and it fell on the floor. So I don't have it anymore. Next. Another small piece. The really fun thing about working small is I don't have to plan. I can just kind of pinch and react, you know what I mean? Make a shape, and well, what would happen if I did this? And what if I added that? And that is really a fun way to work sometimes. So again, I kind of move back and forth between slow and then working more quick, like this piece is a quick piece. Next. I don't even know what to say about this. I really liked that, like that naked lady kind of piece. And I'm like, okay, well, what would I do if I put it more in like an architectural form? So felt like for me, this was almost more of like a study. I was going to do more of these, and I didn't. I did one, and that was kind of enough. So next. This was the first piece that I made. This was big, and it wasn't in sections. I spent a couple of months. I don't know how much time. I felt like it was a couple of months going to a good friend of mine's studio, and I was teaching him how to hand build. And so every week I'd go and work on this piece, and then I got to have him fire it in his large kiln. So it was the first full kind of figure that didn't have parts and pieces to it. Next. I love this slide. My daughter would be mortified if she saw this, but I added this before. I like this because somebody was asking me about it, and they want to know the scale of it, right? So this was her. I'm like, Lydia, sit down there and sit next to that sculpture. So anybody, Seth, you have kids, you know how kids can be when you ask them to do this kind of stuff. So anyways. This is just a work in progress. What I love about this one, again, is like exploring. I feel like the bottom is the slower part of it, but then the top, I wanted to kind of wrap those figures up and around each other so that they weren't really it's like they're making sense, but they're not. So yeah, I don't have a better shot of that, but the top piece was really fun for me to make. Next. You ready? Next. Just another platter, sea snake. Now that I'm talking and looking at these, I'm like, these are repetitive. I have a lot more 2D work, but I never photograph it. So this is all I have. Next. This one's different. Oh, I don't remember. I think I was looking at something, and it was kind of derivative of something. Well, it says tree of life. I was probably looking at, I think I had done a sculpture of a tree, and I was just kind of looking at that kind of work. And so, and I wanted to do a platter, so I took something that I saw, and then I just kind of adapted it to my own interest. Next. I really like this one. I like the simplicity of it. There's the figures again, but they're kind of hidden in those fish. The funny story about this is I had it in a show in Claremont, and it was up for like the whole month. And I think when I was taking it down, I realized that it was upside down. It had been upside down the whole month. So not that you could tell, but you could tell because the fish were swimming upside down, and I hadn't even noticed it. Next. This is this was based on my own work. I'd went to a friend's house. I like doing masks, and I'd went to a friend's house, and her name's Joan Weldon. All you locals know Jody. And I saw this piece on the wall that I loved. I thought it was so great. And so I went right up to it and looked at it really closely because I liked it a lot. And then after like 5 minutes, I realized it was mine. I had made it so long before that I'd forgotten about it. So anyway, so I decided that I would explore that same idea again, just, making like a mask that was larger in size. And that's what that is. Next. Just another head with where, again, like you said, the background, the hair is becoming more and more important. And this is a fun piece. I think this is the first piece where I started including kind of animals that had people bodies, and kind of like the animals are coming to life. And I like doing that. Next. This was a commission piece that I did. I called it After Picasso because it was after a Picasso piece that the buyer wanted. And so, yeah, it turned out really well. Next. I just put this in here because I wanted to add it. I'm going kind of chronological. In 2011, I did a show. In 2011 in January, I said, okay, I love kind of pushing myself and having exercises, and like, I don't know, I like to have deadlines. So I decided to do one piece a day for a whole year. And then I had to do, not only was I going to do a piece every day, but then I had to glaze it and fire it. I documented everything, and I set up a show. So I had a show at this, used to be in Pomona. It's called Bunny Gunner. And I had a show with I had more than 365 pieces because I would lose pieces, and then I would have to make another one. And then later on I would find it. But anyways, I just put this in there to kind of represent the kind of chaos of that exercise. But if anybody ever decides to do it, I would say do it. It was a great thing. It pushed me really hard, and I learned so much from that. But my kids told me, Mommy, please don't ever do that again, because they were so tired of me working on it. Next. This was the boxes. So I had everything. I get really crazy about being organized. And so I had my setup out there where I was photographing everything, but then everything had its own box and numbered. And so this was the show. Because I had to load it in my car and take it to the gallery. Next. That's a change of gear, huh? This was right after I'd gone to a workshop. I think it was John Ballesteri, anyways, and he showed this great method of building large pieces. And anyways, this was a kind of a piece after I'd went to that workshop, and I got super inspired. And so it's kind of different for me because it allowed me to work big without really having a plan. I could just kind of attach these pieces and kind of work intuitively like I like to do, but it's pretty big. Next. This Dog's Best, this was the first piece I made. I started working, volunteering at the LA County Fair. And so I made this in front of people. I would go every Friday, and I decided to do a dog one because this is after my dog, and she's great. And I decided to do her because I was working, a lot of kids were coming in, and I wanted to do something that I felt like the public could relate to. And something, just kind of gentle and happy. So this was a piece I made at the fair that year. Next. Again, this is that the hair taking over. This was again just an exploration in shape and form. And I've always been I hate saying I like tornadoes because when I was a kid I was super afraid of them growing up in Michigan, but there's something about these forms. I love making them, and I like the idea of the power that they have. So that's all. Next. This was, I don't even know. This is like the beginning of a very strange series. I think is because I started making, instead of being humans, they started becoming animals with the human faces. And I don't know, but what I love about this is it just makes me laugh. It's really fun. And I liked the idea of playing with Scaredy Bear, because he looks like he's scared to death, but yet it's a bear. So I like kind of playing with that idea. Next. Same thing. This is like this crazy wabbit, making something that's supposed to be gentle like a rabbit and kind of making it look like it's going to kill somebody. Next. This is another one of those pieces where, well, again, I wanted to go big, but I wanted to go in sections because it's easier to move. And it was another one of those pieces where I realized it was autobiographical without, after the fact. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me and my husband. And I think our kids were teenagers by now. And we realized, I always think of this as how much work it is and how you have to work together to keep everybody going. So it's called Bridge, but I always felt like it's a kind of a reflection of that kind of teamwork it takes to raise a family. Next. This was another piece I made at the fair. I'm like, oh, I'm going really big. I started it in, gosh, I think it was September. And I didn't want to put so many pictures in this, but it's too bad you can't see the bottom because it's great. It has all these funny birds all over the bottom. But the top I made in the end of September, early October. And it's like how to finish a piece, right? And this was right when my mom had been sick and she was dying. I think she died the next day after I finished this. And I always felt like that was her on top, with her kind of crown of birds going around her. So it was a kind of a sad piece for me, but at the same time, I loved it that it kind of came together, and it was kind of in honor of her. So, all right, next. Back to small. This was, I hardly ever show slides of any of my, I don't throw in the wheel that well, but I've always still loved making lidded vessels. And so this was like my teapot series. So again, they're just super fun to explore the figure with the pot. Next. This is another LA County Fair piece I made. And again, I started the fair, got my clay out, and this really sweet little girl, I think she was like 10. And I'm like, she's like, what are you gonna make? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know yet. And she's like, well, why don't you make a whale? And I said, okay, I will. So that was fun. I just went with something a child told me to do, and it was fun. It turned out really good. Again, the details on this were pretty nice. And you can't see them that well, but it was a fun piece. Next. I don't know about this one. Again, I don't even know. Like the title. Again, I think this is just, I started this just exploring putting together different objects and things, and it's definitely telling a story, although I don't know what. I love that. I think probably the highlight for me is that figure. And again, it's probably has something to do with my life at the moment. Next. I put this in here because I wanted to, oh no. Did you guys hear that? Seth, could you hear that?
Yeah.
Whoops. That's what happens when you're in your studio, when you're doing these things. I wanted to put this in here just because I've still been drawing on clay and drawing on these 11 by 11 tablets, and I just wanted to show them like the evolution. I don't photograph these pieces very often, but I found this in my collection. I'm like, oh, I'm going to show that. Again, I'm still kind of doing these. And I love this piece. Next. This was a piece that I started in my studio, and it was great because I didn't have a deadline. I didn't have an idea. I'd been making some small things that kind of felt like this. When I mean small, I mean like maybe 7 inches high. You know what I mean? Just like little kind of diddly things. And so it was just kind of making something really big that had been small. And I'm taking those heads that I love to make, and it's like putting it all together. And this was in sections. So each leg is a section, and then the girl kind of sits on top, and then the crown is on top of that. And this was a piece that was out, I feel like I can't remember where I showed this. I know that it was out at the Maloof garden show one year. So, and I couldn't find the dimensions. I don't have a piece anymore. So, but it was quite tall. Next. This was off after a series of 3 that I did of these, and we had a really fun, I named it Playful because these were after a cat that we had. Her name was Frida, and she was so much fun. And so I did all these kind of pieces that were kind of, I don't know, figures acting like cats. And she had an oversized paw. So I oversized all the hands on these pieces that were kind of after her. So next. This was another idea that I had. It wasn't as big as the 365, and I had this out at the Chafee Museum. It was called 26 pieces. I did 1 piece for each letter of the alphabet, and that was a lot of fun. The alphabet, and what else did I do? I did like little poems with them, and I made a book that went with it. It was a super fun, it was a fun idea, and it was a fun show. This ended up having a lot of family time with this project, because every week I'd be like, okay, you guys, I have to do G. What do I do? And then the whole family would all be brainstorming on what they thought my G sculpture should look like. So this was fun because it participated with so many, again, my loved ones. And so it was a lot of joy. Next. This was out at the airport for a couple of years too. There's not really any story behind this one. This one was a demonstration piece out when I was at Valley College. And so it's just a garden piece. Next. Sitting Pretty. I've done probably about 5 of these. Like, again, I like kind of playing with the idea of a person riding an animal. And I love making horses. I'm not that good at them, but horses are hard when they're standing up because the legs are so skinny. So I'm like, this time the horse is going to lay down. It's going to be sitting down. It'll be easier. So, and I just like I love everything about this. Like, if you look close, it has a lot of fun details. So, next. I made this out at the Creative Arts Group in Sierra Madre a couple of years ago. And this was another piece that I didn't, I made the face for the class, and then the back became, my exploration. And I fired this like 4 times. And again, this picture doesn't show it, but the back is really beautiful. It has like lots of depth to the glaze, and it has a lot going on in the back. I just kept firing it and refiring it and firing it until I got what I wanted. I think I fired it like 4 or 5 times until it was finally done. So it's really heavy, but it's really nice. And this is a piece that would just go in your garden. Next. This was, again, a demonstration piece for that same Sierra Arts Group. And it's just, again, I feel like this was a family piece. I start pieces, and then as they go up, they become more and more personal. But we had that was when we had a lot of stray cats at our house, and we kept trying to get rid of them, and they kept coming back. And so I feel like that was kind of John and I trying to deal with that. That's a cat on top of that house. Inside the house, there's like a little tiny cat. That's my daughter's pet that won't ever come out of her room. And it's just got like a lot of small little personal stories all over it. And this is in sections too. Next. I had a show, I guess it was a few months ago. With this quarantine, I don't even know. I hardly know what day it is, let alone when I had the show. Everything seems kind of quirky right now. But anyways, I had a show out at the Chaffee Museum, and it was called Underdogs and Overlords. And so this was one of my underdogs. And again, that's probably my dog on top of there. Next. Same show. I just kind of playing with the idea of the underdog. This was a little bit literal, but I had to start somewhere. Next. This is not a part of that show. It was like, again, an explore. This is kind of a brand new, I feel like this is much different than my other work. And again, it's kind of, it feels new to me. Again, exploring not only the figure, but just a lot of positive and negative space. Just random. Next. This is I finished, this is the last slide. This was a part of that show with the underdogs. And I was thinking of Lita and the Swan, but I didn't want to do a swan. So I did these geese. And Roberta's a good friend of mine, and she said she grew up with a pet goose. So I titled it after her. So this, I think there's one more. Go ahead, Seth.
Nope, I think that's the end.
Oh, too bad. I put the last one. I don't know. It was just a picture of me and my whole family, and sometimes it would show up on my end, and sometimes it didn't. But I like to end with it just because. Why not, right? But anyways, this was the last piece, so I think I will turn it over to Seth, and you guys can ask questions.
Yeah.
Hi, Kathy Perillo.
That was great. Thank you, Gina. I love seeing all these pieces I haven't seen before of your work. So yes, thank you everybody for all the questions or comments. So one question we got from Tina, who is actually a high school ceramics teacher in Riverside. And she says, in an interview with the Inland Empire Museum of Art, you mentioned how you work with the human head as subject matter because it best communicates the themes you're most interested in: love and companionship, growth and death, balance, and the passage of time. These topics are on so many people's minds right now in quarantine. Do you think your artwork will shift greatly in terms of theme as a result of quarantine and the COVID crisis?
No, I don't think so. I my whole life I tend to follow my own kind of muse, and like I said, I'm usually in this kind of category where I'm like, I'm not going to do it if I'm not having fun. So I working in my studio brings me a ton of joy, and so I can't imagine that that's going to suddenly change. You know what I mean? Or I guess I would say I certainly hope it doesn't. But we'll see. I am doing a series right now. I'm calling it the Quarantine Series, and the only thing that I notice about them is they're really weird. So, next question.
So this is a change of pace. Somebody asked, where would you dumpster dive for tiles?
It was in Upland, and it was before everybody was doing mosaic, right? Where I live in Upland, there's a whole bunch of tile places. And my mom was so great. We'd drive over there, and, the two of us, she was like in her 70s at that point. And, we would just go in, and they'd like, sure, you can go, but you have to dive in, you know what I mean? But we did it a long time ago, and it was before there was like a craze to do mosaic, right? So we would just gather it.
All right. So someone is asking, what advice do you have for artists, both young and old? Very
Oh my
generous.
goodness. I don't know. You can ask Seth for his advice. He gives better advice than I do.
My advice would be keep making stuff and don't be embarrassed to promote it and be a shameless self-promoter.
Now that's good advice, Seth. You can tell me how to be a shameless self-promoter. I could use a little help in that.
All right, and people can continue to type questions. Let's see. Someone asked, how long does it take you to design the large totem type ceramics?
Like I said, the one totem that I have on there, like I said, the whole method was that you didn't have to design it. It just has like a common kind of core up the middle, and you can just kind of, make things and add them and take them away. And if it looks good, you keep it. And if it doesn't, you take it off. You know what I mean? So that particular piece, I didn't plan, but like maybe another one. I would say that it took a long time for me to be able to make larger things that looked good. I can remember when I was in graduate school, I was still struggling with my big ego back then, and I never thought that I had to plan anything. I'm just like, I'm going to go big, and so I would go big, and then the finished product was just not that great. And so now if I'm going larger, and especially if it's with a figurative piece, I try to at least sketch out just something really even like a cartoon, just so I get the proportions right. Because it makes a really big difference. Like, you know what I mean? Just like subtle details about how, just the contrast between big and small. So I try to sketch out the bigger figurative pieces so that I can, because if I make something that I really like, and I got to pay attention to what I like about it. And so then when I turn that into clay, you have to really keep your eye on it. And you got to stand back and look at it, take breaks. that kind of thing. So.
So a technical question from Dureena. Have you worked with metals and ceramic fusion?
No. I don't. It probably can be done, but I usually stay with, when I'm working in clay, I just stick with clay. And then the only time that I usually do mixed media is when I'm doing mixed media, it'll be after the fact, mixing the metal with the ceramics. So. Mm-hmm.
And so Kevin asks, can you discuss the process involved in making pieces with multiple parts?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably the most important about that is planning it. Because that story that I told you about Eve falling on the floor was because I decided to make the whole thing and then cut it up into parts. And I thought that would work. So now what I do is I'll build, and as soon as I'm to a section that I know is going to be separate, I'll put like a piece of paper towel or newspaper, anything that separates the clay, and then I just keep going. I go up and I build like a flange. It'll have like a nice strong flange, paper, a flange, and then I just keep going up. And the idea is that if it stays balanced on its own while I'm making it, it should be fine later. So you just have to really plan and don't cut corners when you're doing that.
So not a question, but Nancy Shobe, she says, I love my chicken woman at my house, Gina. It is my favorite piece of art. I just had to throw that in there too.
Yeah, that's a friend. And she commissioned me to do a chicken lady. I should have a picture of that. I don't actually have an image of it. It turned out really good, but she has it. Yeah. Hi, Nancy.
Well, that leads nicely into this next question of how do you find buyers and commissions for your art, from Julia Gregory.
Well, that's a really good question. How did you do that, Seth?
Well, very successfully, at least.
I know that I was really, I don't have that many buyers or collectors. I have a few, but I know it helped locally when Sam Maloof had bought a couple of my pieces years ago. And that really helped me, because once he bought a few pieces, then other people were like, well, if Sam bought a piece, then I want a piece too. So having him buy my work years ago kind of helped me, at least locally. And then from there, just kind of word of mouth.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a perfect place to stop with a little plug for the Maloof there.
Yeah.
When we open back up, everyone will have to come and walk around the gardens and see Gina's work in its natural habitat of the Discovery Garden there. So yeah, thank you, Gina. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So we are recording this and we'll post it to our YouTube channel very soon. In case you got in late or had to step away, or you want to watch it again. So we'll have this up on an ongoing basis. So yes, tune in next week for Lauren Verdugo, same time, same place. Thanks everybody for joining in, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Seth. You guys don't miss Lauren's presentation. She is awesome. She's got great energy, and she's young. She's a young woman. All right, bye everybody. I see faces I know now. I see my sister, hi Tone, and Richard, Steve, Kathy, Dureena. Hey, all right. Thanks everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye everybody.
Bye.